Did Enzo Fernandez finally get what he deserved? For months, it seemed like the controversy surrounding him simply refused to disappear. The World Cup incident, the reaction from English fans, the social media post, the backlash, the transfer rumors, and the questions about his future at Chelsea all kept following him. But yesterday, something happened that was far more direct than another investigation or another headline. Enzo Fernandez walked into Stamford Bridge for his first appearance of the season, expecting the familiar surroundings of his own club. Instead, before he had even touched the ball, he heard something every footballer dreads: boos from his own supporters. This was not an away stadium. These were not rival fans. These were Chelsea supporters inside Stamford Bridge, the place where Enzo had previously been celebrated as one of the club's biggest stars. Around 45 minutes before kickoff, the stadium announcer read out the team. When Enzo Fernandez's name was announced, sections of the crowd immediately responded with boos. And that was before the match had even started. No goal had been conceded. No pass had been misplaced. No tackle had been made. The reaction was entirely about everything that had happened before this moment. Then came the second half. Enzo entered the game, and the reaction returned. Some supporters cheered, others booed, and almost every touch carried a strange mixture of noise that made it obvious just how divided the situation had become. But perhaps the most uncomfortable moment came when an opponent fouled Enzo. Instead of hearing the entire stadium support their own midfielder, some Chelsea supporters actually celebrated the fact that he had been brought down. Think about that for a moment. Your own supporters are supposed to celebrate when you win the ball, applaud when you make a great pass, and defend you when an opponent tackles you. Yet Enzo was standing in the middle of his own stadium while sections of the crowd made their feelings perfectly clear. And the timing could hardly have been more dramatic. Chelsea's self-imposed transfer deadline had just passed, with no bid from Manchester City arriving for Enzo. For weeks, rumors had suggested that a move could happen. Manchester City had been linked with the midfielder, and there had been speculation that the situation at Chelsea might eventually lead to a transfer. But when the deadline arrived, nothing happened. No major offer came in. No dramatic announcement followed. Enzo remained a Chelsea player, and that meant he had to walk straight back into Stamford Bridge carrying the entire weight of the controversy with him. The memories were still there. The World Cup confrontation involving English players was still being discussed. The social media controversy was still being remembered. The Falklands-related imagery had not disappeared. Neither had the anger among sections of English football supporters. Then there were the transfer stories. Enzo had reportedly been linked with Real Madrid, but that possibility did not develop into a move. Chelsea still had him under contract, and suddenly the escape route that many expected was no longer there. So when he stepped onto the pitch yesterday, he was not simply playing a preseason football match. He was walking into a stadium where his own supporters were sending him a message. And then another storyline made the situation even more uncomfortable. Morgan Rogers, Chelsea's huge new signing, scored on his debut. Chelsea had invested heavily in Rogers, and his first appearance could hardly have started better. He scored early, giving the supporters something to celebrate and giving the new signing an immediate connection with the crowd. At the same time, the previous record-level investment in Enzo was receiving a completely different reaction. One player was celebrating his first goal in front of the Stamford Bridge crowd. The other was hearing boos every time his name became relevant. The contrast could not have been clearer. But then came another moment that showed just how complicated the situation really is. When Enzo entered the match, Chelsea captain Reece James handed him the captain's armband. Think about the symbolism. On one side, sections of the crowd were booing Enzo. On the other, the club captain was still showing him a level of respect and responsibility by giving him the armband. It demonstrated that whatever the supporters think about Enzo, inside the Chelsea squad the situation may be much more complicated. Football clubs are rarely as simple as supporters' reactions make them look. Players still have relationships. Managers still have tactical decisions to make. Captains still have responsibilities. And then there was Chelsea's new manager. When asked about the reception Enzo received, the manager did not launch into a passionate defense of the midfielder. Instead, he focused on the team, the match, pre-season, and the broader preparations for the new campaign. Enzo's reception was not turned into a major public argument. That silence was interesting because sometimes what a manager does not say can be just as revealing as what he does say. This was still only a pre-season friendly, yet sections of Stamford Bridge had already made their feelings known. And that creates a much bigger question. If this is what happened at home, what happens when Chelsea travel? Stamford Bridge at least contains Chelsea supporters who are divided. Some will cheer Enzo. Some will boo him. Some may simply remain silent. But an away stadium is different. The opposition supporters have no reason to protect him. They have no emotional connection to him. And many English fans have been waiting for the next opportunity to express their anger. Every touch of the ball could become another moment of noise. Every foul could trigger a reaction. Every mistake could be amplified. And suddenly, the question becomes whether Enzo can handle an entire Premier League season under that kind of pressure. The situation becomes even more complicated because leaving Chelsea may not be easy. The transfer window has a deadline, and Chelsea have reportedly indicated that they do not intend to sell him in January. Enzo also has a long-term contract. So unless a club is willing to make an enormous financial commitment, he could remain at Chelsea for the foreseeable future. And that is where the numbers become important. Chelsea invested heavily in Enzo, and any potential buyer would have to consider not just his footballing ability but the entire situation surrounding him. A transfer fee in the region of £120 million would be enormous. A club would have to ask whether it makes sense to spend that kind of money on a player who is already carrying so much controversy. Real Madrid did not provide the escape route many expected. Manchester City did not complete the move. And Chelsea were left with the same player they had signed as a midfield centerpiece. Enzo now faces a completely different challenge. He cannot simply pretend that the controversy does not exist. It has followed him into his own stadium. It has affected the reaction of supporters. It has become part of the conversation surrounding every transfer rumor. And now the competitive Premier League season is approaching. That is why yesterday felt different. For months, the consequences had mostly existed in the form of arguments, headlines, investigations, social media debates, and transfer speculation. But yesterday, those consequences became physical and immediate. Enzo walked onto a football pitch and heard his own supporters tell him exactly how they felt. There was no press conference required. No statement needed. The reaction came directly from the stands. And perhaps the most telling detail was that this happened before a competitive Premier League match had even been played. This was pre-season. The stakes were relatively low. Yet the emotional temperature inside Stamford Bridge was already high. Imagine what happens when the Premier League begins. Imagine Enzo walking into an away stadium with thousands of opposition supporters waiting for him. Imagine the first time he receives the ball. Imagine the reaction after his first mistake. Imagine the noise after his first foul. And imagine how different that atmosphere will be from yesterday, when only sections of his own supporters were against him. That is the part of this story that Chelsea and Enzo now have to confront. The controversy is no longer something happening somewhere else. It is inside Stamford Bridge. It is inside the transfer market. It is inside the conversations around the Chelsea squad. And it is now part of Enzo's footballing reality. Maybe he can silence the critics with performances. Maybe goals, assists, tackles, and dominant midfield displays can gradually change the atmosphere. Football fans can be incredibly unforgiving, but they can also change their minds quickly when a player starts winning matches. Or maybe the relationship has already broken down too far, and the only realistic solution will eventually be a transfer. For now, though, Enzo Fernandez remains a Chelsea player. The transfer rumors did not produce an exit. The speculation did not produce a new club. And the first game of the season has already delivered a warning. Yesterday was not necessarily the end of the story. It may have been the beginning of something much bigger. Enzo seemed to have escaped the consequences for a long time. But now those consequences have arrived at the place where he was supposed to feel most comfortable. His own home stadium. And if the reaction at Stamford Bridge was already this intense before the Premier League season started, nobody knows how loud it could become once the real competition begins. So the question remains, Did Enzo Fernandez finally get the consequences he had been avoiding? Or was yesterday only the first chapter of a much bigger confrontation? Tell me what you think. Should Chelsea continue to play Enzo and give him the chance to win the supporters back? Or should the club finally move him on? Let me know in the comments, and if you want more football stories, controversies, and breaking Premier League updates, make sure you subscribe. The season is about to begin, and this Enzo Fernandez story is clearly nowhere near finished.